And when he, Jesus, got into the boat, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves. But he was asleep. And they went and woke him, saying, "Save us, Lord, we are perishing." And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, O ye of little faith?" Then he rose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And the men marveled, saying, "What sort of man is this, that even winds and seas obey him?"
In his book, Creatures of Habit, Pastor Steve Poe, tells this story. This is what he says. "When I was in grade school, several of the kids in the neighborhood walked to and from school each day. And we walked down a street where a man had a large dog, a boxer. It had a very intimidating bark and was tethered to a long chain in the backyard. And when we would walk past this house, that dog would start barking and come running after us. Of course, the chain would eventually stop him, but we were always worried that one day he would break loose and he would attack us. I would start worrying about the dog blocks before I ever reached that house. Well, one day, the owner of the dog was in the yard and watched this entire scene unfold. And the next day, as we walked by the house, the man was once again outside, only this time he had the dog on a leash. And when he saw us, he began to motion for us to come over to him. We didn't know if we were in trouble or if he was going to let his dog bite us. But either way, we were not walking over to him. And then he started walking over to us. And the entire time, the man kept saying to us, "You don't need to be afraid of my dog." And then he knelt down and he pulled back the dog's upper lip to reveal he had no teeth. Seriously, there was not a tooth in that dog's mouth. And the man said, "Even if this dog were ever to get loose and try to bite you, it wouldn't hurt." All of us started to laugh. And we were never afraid of that dog again. When that man told us the truth, all of the fears and worries we had about that dog were instantly gone. This is what Jesus is saying to us in this passage. You don't need to be afraid. The dog has no teeth. It has no teeth. And he says it over and over and over again in the Bible. There are so many things that we fear, not the least of which what is going on now. But maybe you're facing something that you have no control over and it is making you fearful. It might even be irrational. I'm the king of the irrational fear. I could make you a list. So when we look at our passage this morning, we realize that there is nothing to fear, that all of it is toothless because we have Jesus. After telling the disciples, his disciples in the book of John, in chapter 16, about the hard things that would happen to him, this was the night of his arrest and all, he says this to them: "I have said these things to you that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world." These are words of peace and power. So I want us to see three things this morning from this passage about why we should not fear, and they are all centered in Jesus. The first one is his presence. I'm doing the good Presbyterian thing today. It's alliterated. His presence, his power, and his peace. Okay, his presence, his power, and his peace. So let's look at his presence first. So the Sea of Galilee, I have a little video to show you here that I took when I was there. Sea of Galilee is only about 17 miles long. Is that coming up? Yeah, it just sort of pans. It's a little small. Sorry about that. But it's about 17 miles long and 7 miles wide at its widest point. And it's surrounded by hills. On one side are the Golan Heights, which are taller than the other mountains around. They're about 4,000 feet or so above sea level. And then on the other side, I don't know what the name of those mountains are, but they're about 2,000 feet. Of course, in Chile, that's just like little piddly hills, right? But that's another thing. I'm a little bit arrogant that way since I came from Chile. Sorry, but Santiago has 6 18,000 footers and above around it. It's pretty cool, right? So this is just 4,000 and 2,000. But here's the thing about these hills. The cold air on the top rushes down the mountain and hits the sea air, which is warm. Why is it warm? Because the Sea of Galilee is about 600 feet below sea level. So it's warm down there. So this air rushes down at times, and it creates this massive storm. These storms that just come up in a moment, and the winds are huge. It's not so much a rainstorm as it is a windstorm, and the waves go up to over 10 feet. It's what we have here in verse 24. And behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves. It was one of these squalls where the air was flowing down and the waves were coming up. This one might have been bigger than normal. Now, we need to know that the boat they were in was not very big. I have a picture of a boat that we saw there. This one doesn't, I don't know how long this one is. They say the boat was anywhere between 20 and 30 feet long. I don't think this is 20 or 30 feet long, but there were a lot of disciples in a boat. They found this in the mud, and it is dated from the period around when Jesus was there. So these were the kinds of boats that were that they were fishing in the Sea of Galilee. But whatever, they weren't big boats. Some of them had sails, but they wouldn't have had the sails out when the wind was coming. It would have been too strong for a full sail. It tells us here that it was so strong that the boat was being swamped by waves just flowing over, and they were terrified. Now, this is saying something, given that a number of them were professional fishermen, and they'd been fishing on this lake all of their lives. They knew about these squalls. Why are they so terrified? They're terrified because this one probably is bigger than usual. It's one probably that they haven't encountered before, or they know how to avoid them, and they weren't able to avoid this one. Because remember, Jesus told them, let's go to the other side. Would you have been afraid? Well, I'm not a very good boatman. I would have been terrified. But there's something I want you to see here in verse 24. It says, as I just read, and behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves. But he, that is Jesus, was asleep. Jesus was asleep. Very simple. Jesus was asleep. So what about his presence? Jesus is right there. He's powerful. Why are they uptight about this? Shouldn't they have taken comfort in that? Well, he's asleep. I've told you before about a guy in our church in Chile when I was a kid. I was about 10 years old, who had a bike accident, banged his head, never really got it treated, and eventually passed away from some kind of a bleed in the brain. And I'll spare you all the details, but I went to the funeral, and I got a look at him, and I was terrified. So that I went home, and I was never one to go to sleep right away at night, but I was so afraid that my parents made my brother Brad sleep with me. But he was a stupid jerk. Do you know what he did? He fell asleep right away. And he may have been lying right there, but he was asleep. And I'm wide awake, and I have monsters coming into my bed. What good is he right here? That loser. This is kind of what it is. He's there, but he's not there. He's asleep, right? Does he not know? This may actually thwart his plan. He's not really aware, is he? We're really in trouble here. We may get in trouble. Well, let's Let's think about Jesus for a minute. He's exhausted. He's been dealing with people day after day after day after day. And then at night, we know that he had a pattern of seeking his Father at night. He would go and he would pray to his Father. So he wouldn't get probably a ton of sleep. And so when he tells them that they need to go to the other side, it's probably because he's about to collapse with exhaustion. He's very tired, and so he falls into a deep sleep. He doesn't wake up when the storm comes up. He doesn't wake up when the waves crash over the side of the boat. He doesn't wake up with the rain. I mean, you'd think that he's getting splashed with rain, that he might wake up, but he's exhausted and he's in a deep sleep. So the fact that they are afraid means something pretty important. They don't really know who he is. Jesus, the God of the universe, is right there with them. Right? He's the all-powerful one. We'll get to power in a minute. But it doesn't seem like they have asked themselves the question about who Jesus is and what his purpose is. And I think that when we fear, we struggle with the same thing. We don't really acknowledge who he is. Don't you think that the last thing you say to someone when you are saying goodbye to them, that the last thing you say to them is probably one of the most important things you say to them? Well, Jesus, when he was leaving to ascend to his Father, the very last phrase he says in the book of Matthew, the very last thing, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. See, Jesus isn't just speaking to his disciples here. He's speaking to all of us that follow after him. Well, how can he say that? Because he sent his Spirit to dwell in us. The first step in overcoming fear is a recognition of his presence with us. He has promised it. You may say to me, I don't feel his presence. All I can feel is the fear. Where is he? And I'll say to you, you may not feel it subjectively, but objectively, what we know is, what he tells us in his word is that he is with us always, even to the end of the age. And he says it over and over and over and over again in so many different ways. I'm the vine, you're the branches. We're there together, John 15. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you, John 14. Do not be afraid, for I am with you, Acts 18. No one can snatch them from my Father's hand, John 10. No one. The enemy's toothless. This is the point that makes Christianity different from every other religion in the world. We believe in Emmanuel, which means God with us. God with us. His presence. That's the first step in overcoming fear. Number two, his power. Jesus is asleep in the boat. And though we may attribute it to extreme tiredness, one thing we know is that he wasn't terribly worried. He's sound asleep. It didn't matter how big the storm was. It didn't matter the amount of adversity there was. He was not fearful of this storm. Why wasn't he fearful of this storm? Well, because he's the Lord of the storm. He knows that. He created the storm. By the word of his power, he created the storm. So the question is, do we believe this? What's our biggest problem? Well, the first problem we have, we doubt his presence. We think we're alone. We think we're orphans. We think he hasn't come. We don't feel it, and so we go with our feelings. And let me tell you, your feelings take you to all kinds of places that you don't want to go. No, we live by the objective truth of his word that says he's with us. That's the first thing. But certainly, another thing we doubt is his power, his ability to take care of us. I would have been terrified by this storm. How could you not look at the storm around you? You're feeling the rain, you're feeling the wind, and you certainly feel the water that is washing over you. You're fearing for your life. In this case, you're looking outside the boat. and seeing the menace of the wind. And it was as natural as breathing. You feel this. These are things, we have a self-preservation gene. God put it there, right? But what do we do when we're terrified like that? When you're faced with insurmountable odds and your fear is overwhelming, you may not even be faced with insurmountable odds. It may just be your mind running away with you, but they still feel like insurmountable odds. Brothers and sisters, what do you do when you're afraid? We deal with facts. We deal with facts. We cannot rely on our feelings. They're so unreliable. So we've already seen that he's with us no matter what, but what about his power? The disciples certainly doubted his power in this situation, that he could actually do something about it. Perhaps they didn't have a full picture of Jesus like we do. We actually have a much fuller picture than they did. The disciples knew that he was the Christ and that they had seen him do miracles. They knew he came from God and had power. They had never seen him command the elements like a storm before, but they knew he could do great things. But we know so much more than that, don't we? What do we know? Well, we know that Jesus is the Lord of creation. He spoke it into being. He formed every part of it. He made the wind. He commanded, and it was formed. He has ultimate power. He is the God that caused the plagues to fall on Egypt. He's the God that was on Mount Sinai that caused the earthquake to come, Lord over creation. He's the God that passed with his glory in front of Moses. He's the God of the Red Sea, parting the Red Sea. He's the God of the pillar of fire at night and the cloud by day. He's the God that saved David from Goliath. He's the God that caused Midian to turn on themselves and to give Gideon a great big victory. He's the God that reduced the great king Nebuchadnezzar to an animal, and he grazed on grass for 7 years. And then he's the God that restored him again to power. He's the God that made the storm rise on the ship that Jonah was in. And he's the God that made the storm subside when they threw him overboard. And these were just the ones I could think of off the top of my head. Do we understand who Jesus is? I actually think we understand this, at least intellectually. So what's the issue? The issue that goes around and around in our heads is this: he might be powerful, but can we trust him to take care of us? Is he going to use that power for me? Or am I going to be destroyed? Does he have my back? Will he take care of me? The disciples didn't believe he would, verse 25, and they went and woke him, saying, "Save us, Lord, we are perishing." And Jesus said to them, and he said to them, "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?" It's a rebuke. When I'm afraid, I don't want to be rebuked, do you? I want somebody to lay a warm fuzzy on me and to tell me it'll be okay, they're there. He rebukes them, "You of little faith." In essence, it's almost like he's saying, in light of who I am and my presence among you and the love that I clearly have for you, your fear is actually an absurdity. It's irrational. Why? Because the circumstances are bad? No, that's not the irrational part. They were in trouble. They really were in trouble. This was a real situation. This wasn't a figment of their imaginations. It was a real situation. Why was it irrational for them to fear? Because Jesus says, "I've got you. I'm with you. My presence is with you, and my power will protect you." The famous 19th century English preacher, Charles Spurgeon, said in one of his sermons, "We know that God is too wise to err and too good to be unkind." And I would add to that, and too powerful to let anything but good come to us. But it's good defined by his definition, not by ours. We got to stop defining everything. We got to stop making ourselves the rational people. It's a good defined by him. So to prove to them and to us that he is powerful over everything, he does what seems like the impossible. Verse 26, then he rose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was great calm. He's the powerful one that has us in his hands, and he promises to get us home safely. So no circumstance, no pitfall, no hardship will thwart his plan to get us home safely. You may go through the worst of things. You may get hurt. You may get sick. But he promises to get us home safely. Corrie ten Boom, who suffered in a Nazi concentration camp and lost her sister and her father to the Nazis, said this: never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. Number 3, his peace. Verse 26, and there was a great calm. There was a great calm. So most of the time when we are afraid, we pray for peace. I don't know that that's a wrong prayer to pray, but it's wrong-headed in many ways. And it's often sinful. Now, that's pretty strong to say that, to pray for peace. It's often sinful. Why is it often sinful? Because so often we desire the peace so much more than we desire him. See, peace is a byproduct of knowing him. So when we're just asking for peace, we're asking him, we're manipulating him. Do what you do, God, and give me peace because I need this right now. It's so often divorced from wanting to know his presence and letting him give us whatever he's going to give us. In other words, so often we long for things like having easy lives where our circumstances are working out and our families are all just fine. I've talked about suffering before and how we don't have a category for it in our culture, and we do everything we can to get away from it. We don't want a hardship, but life with Jesus is a life of taking our eyes off of our circumstances and putting them on him. It's a life of letting go of things that are not important, grabbing hold of him. It's a life where our plans are not important. So it was Jesus himself who had sent them across. In the passage that we looked at last week, he said he ordered them, let's go across. Probably exhausted, but he knew what was going to happen. Do you think for 1 minute he wasn't aware of what lesson he was going to teach them? Why would he let them go through such terror? It's because he wanted them to understand who he was. He wasn't just anyone. Verse 27, and the men marveled, saying, what sort of man is this, that even winds and sea obey him? Now, the ESV gets it wrong. It doesn't say what sort of man is this, because man, anthropos, is not in the text related to Jesus. It's not there. It's only when it talks about the disciples in that text. So, it doesn't say what sort of man is this. The disciples are not trying to discern what kind of man this is that commands the forces of nature, but they're beginning to wonder if the word man is adequate to describe him at all. They simply say, who is this? Who is this? See, in our fearful moments, we wonder what kind of God would allow us to face what we're facing. But we have information that the disciples didn't have yet, that this God would descend to take on our form and become a man, and then would allow himself to be crucified for our sakes and be punished by the Father in our place. And it should leave us astonished. And we should cry out, who is this? Who would do that for a wayward people? And the answer comes back resoundingly. He is the God-man given in love for his people. We can have confidence that we will never have to face the wrath of God because Jesus faced it in our place. We will never have to wonder if we will perish because Jesus perished for us. We will never have to wonder if our suffering or hardship or difficulty is out of his control because Jesus on the cross was in complete control. He didn't have to be there, but because of the joy of gaining us, he stayed and he endured what we deserved. Brothers and sisters, when we understand this and we fall on our knees before him, that's when he promises peace. See, Jesus said that he came to fulfill the law. This event on the Sea of Galilee is actually a fulfillment of Psalm 107. We already sang about it this morning. It's the drunken sailor song that everybody laughs about, but it's really in the text in a certain way. I want to read this psalm to you and let you see how this event with Jesus is the fulfillment. Psalm 107, verse 23. Some went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the great waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, his wondrous works in the deep. For he commanded and raised the stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. They mounted up to heaven. They went down to the depths. Their courage melted away in their evil plight. They reeled and staggered like drunken men and were at their wits' end. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad that the waters were quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. You want to see how this is all a fulfillment of that psalm? He calms the storm, and he brings them to their desired haven. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German pastor who loved Jesus. Probably we wouldn't agree with his theology in many ways, in a lot of ways. But he loved Jesus. And he was part of the resistance to Hitler and had taken part in the plot to kill him. And he was arrested and he was eventually executed for the crime. His execution took place 1 month before Germany surrendered. 1 month. And some people think that Hitler was so angry about the people that had plotted against him that he wanted to make sure they got executed before this thing was over. But they executed him 1 month. But what's remarkable about Bonhoeffer was his peace in adverse circumstances. This is a prayer that he wrote in prison. Lord, it is dark in me, but with you there is light. I am lonely, but you do not leave me. I am feeble in heart, but with you there is help. I am restless, but with you there is peace. And after his execution, the doctor of the camp is quoted as saying, in the almost 50 years that I've worked as a doctor, I have hardly ever seen a man die so entirely submissive to the will of God. He died in peace. Do you know why Bonhoeffer died in peace? Because he knew that the dog had no teeth, had no ability to keep him from going where he was going, to get home safely. And he knew that Jesus would get him to his desired haven. Do you know that this morning? That's the gospel, and it changes everything. Let's pray.